U.S. Social Security is facing insolvency by 2033.
If that trust fund runs short, benefits would have to be cut by around 20%.
At the same time, the U.S. retirement system received a C+ rating from the Mercer CFA Institute Global Pension Index in 2024.
The Netherlands actually took the top seed again in 2024. Australia was number 6 in our survey, but it's a C+, but that puts us middle of the pack. It means that the system is solid, designed well, but there is a significant risk. And if we don't clear that risk up, the system could be in some jeopardy.
Americans save dramatically more than in other countries.
But
the 401k system won't work. If Gen Z has some money in a retirement account, I will guarantee you that most of that money will be leaked out before retirement to buy a healthcare policy, to deal with an emergency room, to maybe buy a house, which is good, but that money won't be there for retirement, or all the other kind of life contingencies that happen, over that 40 years that you're working.
Countries around the world are raising their retirement ages as well as requiring mandatory contributions into personal retirement savings. Experts suggest this can help address modern problems, like people living longer and fewer workers paying into the system. Here's how the U.S. retirement system compares to the rest of the world, and what experts think it can do to improve. Let's consider some of the features that are often present in the A-grade systems. They are a net replacement rate, including both public and private pensions, of at least 65% for a median income earner with a full career. Private pension coverage of at least 80% of the working age population. Pension contributions that are being invested for the future of at least 12% of wages. And a well-governed and well-regulated private pension system.
I think is important to highlight the Netherlands that's in the top all the time. They have just passed rules in the last couple of years. They're moving from a defined benefit arrangement to a defined contribution.
A defined contribution plan, such as a 401k in the United States, works a little bit like a bucket. Workers decide how much to put in, how to invest it, and in some cases, employers add to the bucket as well. In the United States, participation in these plans is voluntary, and workers typically must choose to opt in. Usually, they can access all of the money upon retirement. A defined benefit plan, however, resembles a faucet. Workers pay into programs such as Social Security or employer-sponsored pensions and receive a steady monthly payment upon retirement, typically for life. The benefit plan provider sets the contribution amount and how the money is invested.
In the Netherlands, there's a mandatory contribution made. You can't opt out of it, either as an employer or an employee. So getting money in the US is a real challenge because it is a voluntary system. But if we're going to stay voluntary, then getting it easier to launch a plan and join a plan is the critical thing for us to focus on.
The Netherlands is not alone in requiring people to save.
I've worked in a number of countries, including Chile and Australia. Both of those have national mandatory defined contribution plans. Both of the systems, I think, have worked fairly well in being able to help people get in early, invest, and save toward retirement.
The thing that I like about Australia is that everyone's covered. It's hard to beat the everyone's covered provisions. They shifted from largely a defined benefit system to a defined contribution years ago. And so when they did that, the employers were happy to go to a defined contribution. And so the fact that they had mandatory contributions and the way they did it actually was slow. They started out at a low mandatory employer contribution and then they've risen over time.
Not everyone agrees with the Mercer CFA assessment.
Mercer is a pension consultant firm. They care about these little details of how retirement plans work. For instance, they penalize the US because you're not required to buy an annuity with your retirement savings. They penalize the US because we allow pre-retirement withdrawals and loans. All of that is fine. What they don't account for is Americans save dramatically more for retirement than do people in the typical developed country. Retirement plan assets in the US are 2.5 times the median of OECD countries, which means even if we have these picayune faults with our program, we're saving much, much more for retirement.
Other experts argue just looking at averages can be misleading.
The median level of retirement savings for baby boomers is 0, meaning most people have nothing. And if you just take the average, you take in the people who have a couple of $1,000,000. So we have the boomers moving into retirement, 5% have the amount of money they need.
For the US system, the thing that could change that grade significantly, the most important is actually coverage. Our 401k plans are voluntary.
A 401k is a workplace retirement savings plan in the US that allows employees to set aside part of their paycheck into accounts that are invested in assets such as stocks and bonds. In most cases, the money goes in before income taxes are applied, so you can defer paying taxes until you withdraw the money in retirement.
Americans have the tendency to sort of create ideals of how other countries' programs work. But the reality is that the typical US retiree has a higher income than the typical retiree in the Netherlands or Norway or Denmark or Sweden. So something's working right here. We've got the money in retirement.
As of March 2023, 70% of US workers had access to a retirement plan, but only 53% participated.
So that immediately is an issue. They still get Social Security, so it's not like they don't have any retirement. They might also have private savings. All of that will be factored into the grade.
Even if Americans do save, many pull money out of their accounts early. This is called 401k leakage.
The assumptions that people will save 10 to 20% of their income every paycheck from the beginning of their work histories, like age 26, is just not credible given human behavior and the way the labor market works.
The lost savings due to 401k cash outs was estimated to be between $60 and $105 billion in 2019.
As you change jobs in the United States, you can just take the money out. Now you pay penalties, and I don't recommend taking the money out, but people do. And so particularly when they're small, because you've only worked a few years in a bunch of places, it's so tempting to take it out. But compound interest, that builds over time. When you take it out for your first 3 or 4 jobs, you really, really decrease the benefit that you get at the end.
Another way people may struggle is by not pacing their spending once they enter retirement. One way around this is using income stream payments, or annuitization as it's called in the United States.
When you have a defined contribution plan, you can take the money all in one lump sum. You can roll it over into an IRA. You can actually take it out and pay taxes on it. People do that. But what that means is you're not getting a consistent stream of payments. And so the ability to manage that bucket of assets now becomes each individual's thing to manage. It's complicated. So those are the things that drag us down to a C+.
A Nobel Prize winner called that problem, having a lump sum and making it last the rest of your life, the nastiest problem in finance because of so many other variables. What's going to happen in the market, what's going to happen with tariffs, and then just when you're going to get sick and when you're going to die. All those calculations are necessary to make the right decision, and nobody has that information.
The US is not the only country that struggles with this.
In Australia, it's a good system in that it is a mandatory system. They're increasing the amount people have to pay in. The one thing they didn't get quite right was that they didn't require retirees to take part of their money and buy a lifetime income stream. And so as a result, in Australia, people can still take all or most of their lump sum, go on an overseas experience, travel around the world, and then come back with their handout saying, oh, I'm poor. I wish to get my poor person's pension. And they are paid relatively well from that welfare pension. So there's so many ins and outs that pension plans have to solve, and so many design attributes that you really have to look at each of the stages in life, getting people in, getting them to invest, and then what happens when they retire. And no country has a perfect system.
Australia knows that too many people are taking too large of lump sums, and they're worried about the long livers. Guess who they are? They are the women who are left behind in these couples, that the couple makes the decision at retirement, and it's the female, most likely, who has to live through the consequences of it. So what we've learned is that couples tend to spend kind of inappropriately or more money than they should if they were funding as long a life as a female. So you have the risk of poverty and downward mobility skyrocket for women who become widows or become a divorce. And so actually protecting people against taking a lump sum has the effect of protecting women more than men just because of their longevity.
Saving for retirement is difficult, regardless of where you live. By 2050, the world could be facing a $400 trillion shortfall in the money people need to retire. And the U.S. is a major part of the problem.
I'm frequently asked as a pension expert, which country has the best retirement system? And my answer is a little bit equivocal. It's that every country's retirement system is a product of the path that it grew on.
Some of these proposals, such as a mandatory defined contribution system, may not go over well in the United States.
Now, of course, Social Security is mandatory in the United States. So, it's not like we don't have any mandatory benefits, but the idea that this top up, this second tier would be mandatory, I find it hard to believe the US would head in that direction. You can't have the same system every place in the world. What you can is have the best system that you have within the culture that you have. There are some good things in there that drag us up. We've got a significant amount of assets in defined contribution plans. We've had them for a very long time. We still have some people that are covered by defined benefit plans. And in the US, we have a progressive benefit formula in the Social Security program, which means you get more money to your lower waged employees. That also helps with the adequacy. So there are pluses and minuses, and there are things we could do to make it a little bit tighter. And honestly, that is the point of the pension index, is to give everyone an opportunity to understand what's working and then understand what's not and see what they can change.
There's a variety of things that you can critique the U.S. retirement system for, but instead of looking at just features, you should look at results. And the results are we save more than in most other countries, and we have among the very, very highest retirement incomes in the world. To me, that speaks to the success of how our program works.